This is a history of an SMP I played during the June to July of 2025. It was a school SMP, quote unquote school, being that it was only between a small group of friends. With that being said, let's begin. Prologue, Prehistory. The Isle SMP was first imagined in the minds of the admin Zebras YT a few months after the end of the previous Oasis SMP. Oasis had been a successful server, lasting around a month from November 22nd, 2024 to around Christmas of that year. Though not in the form of Isle, the concept was thought up not long after Oasis's death. Oasis's success had been primarily attributed to the peace caused by having none of the troublemakers that plagued many previous servers, as they had been banned beforehand. This peace would be the model for Isle's own. Time would prove it useful until a certain point. Chapter 1, The Early Days. Isle SMP had begun on June the 10th, 2025. Interestingly, the server began at an inopportune moment for many of the players who would become future regulars. Indeed, the decision by Zebras YT had been to start the server in the middle of our first semester exams, though it had been on the day where most players concluded their last exam, and as such would have a few free days to play. The first server would be a difficult time for the three of us that had the time to be present for the server's opening. The island that would be later named Zebrai would be proved to be a resource-deficient land in all but trees, and would cause the food situation to be dire in the beginning. This first hurdle would be overcome in time, and riches would be quickly obtained, as the huge caves below the lands beyond the narrow strait were rich with ores. This here is the narrow strait. It's more of a river, but we eventually built a few small bridges across it, as you can see. By the end of the first day, enough had been secured that the tools were diamond, armor iron, and some basic infrastructure was constructed. Very quickly, we had villagers and a full enchantment table constructed on the ridge that formed a valley ideal for construction on Zebrai. As you can see here, there's a very prominent uplift of the land compared to the flat terrain at the bottom. The early islands of Zebrai were what to be expected in that era. Simple wood and stone structures with little embellishment, save for the house of Peanut MF, which would have greater detail in its exterior in the first week than some later buildings would. These early days would be peaceful, as there was nothing worth starting conflict over, though this would change sharply very soon. Chapter 2, The First Good Time. The days that would come after the immediate start would be a time of great success and activity, as player count was high and development was frequent. The other players that became regulars made their beginnings here. Some raised intricate structures with elegant detailing, such as the aforementioned Peanut MF, whose home's lobby featured a central feature that utilized glass gradients, and Foreigner 09's glass dome, which would eventually, after long procrastination, become a base that was respected on the server. Though it would not be completed on his own, nor during this period. At this time, Rice's Goods project to drain an ocean monument would begin after the discovery of one off the eastern coast of Zebrai. The project would be the main building focus of Rice's Good until that project was abandoned after it was deemed unfeasible and the monument turned into a deposit of prismarine for the construction of Foreigner 09's dome. Rice's Good claimed dominion over the entirety of Zebrai, and during this time would map out Zebrai and clear most of the island of trees, save for the parts close to the narrow strait, for Zebras YT had built his home there. As you can see, his home is visible as these two grey blobs on the map. This map is unfortunately a much later rendition of the islands, and the majority of spawn was terraformed out. Over time, the impacts of this endeavor has been neglected as replanting and reforesting was done by newer arrivals. One of these newer arrivals would be Mysteron, who had been one of the main enemies in previous servers. An understanding was reached, and during this period he would be one of the best additions to the world. His home, he decided, would be on the twin islands off the coast of the southern coast of Zebrai. They are but ruins now, for they were destroyed in his exodus from Spawn later in the server's life. Henry the Engineer. This individual was the greatest enemy that Mysteron had during the server's lifespan. For someone so incompetent, it was incredible the vast impact he had on the server. The server's first ban was awarded to him after he burnt down the shack Mysteron had constructed upon those twin islands. This almost plunged the server into a crisis, but was avoided as calmer heads prevailed. This turn of events was likely foreseen by all parties involved, as the enmity between two was well known, stretching far beyond the servers of Zebras YT. This event would hardly bring an end to this era, however, as server prosperity would continue long after. The server prospers. An example of the server's prosperity during this era was an inside joke that would go around between 409, Reisiger, and Mysteron during the first week. A white elephant gift-giving of sorts was devised by the three, where items of comedic value named after the women the participants were supposed to have relationships of some sort, with the intention to mock and satirize. It was a school SMP, of course. This was spurned after the immense volume of gossip dropped by Mysteron during sessions on the server, which were documented by Ricegood and 409. These two privy individuals would form an understanding that would later lead to the FTS Alliance. During this time, various XP farms were created and devised by the players. The most notable were Mysteron's Mob Farm, far off the east of Zebrai, and Zebras YT's Armadillo XP Farm in his basement. They would both end up destroyed. The Armadillo Farm suffered a mundane fate, being broken in some way during the third week. The Mob Farm, third of its construction, would end after Mysteron fled Spawn to construct a new base 160,000 blocks from Spawn. This destruction would be one of the underlying tensions that ultimately led to the invocation of the single command privilege held by early members of the server by Rice's Good to ban Mysteron. The final Mob Farm was the third of its construction in that its predecessors were insufficient for the demands of the server. They had been both slow and ineffectual due to Mysteron's ad hoc construction. Only the third was worth note. Exploration during this era was frequent. Rice's Good's affinity for cartography on previous servers was a consistent theme, and maps of the surrounding land and seas were created during early in this period, with other server members also engaging in such, finding mushroom islands and woodland mansions. With this, the first good time can be concluded as an era of prosperity and activity that propelled server progress forward. However, the period after would be even more than that. Chapter 3, the Golden Era, or the Second Good Time. This period was the greatest of all on the server. It had the highest growth, and player activity rivaled in the Zebras SMPs only by Half-Life's first weeks. Sharing many players and common themes, it is easy to understand why. During this time, new players would make their appearance and impact on the server for the first time. Indeed, players like Will McSwee, whose Hobbit Hall home would become a model for the homes of others, and Flat Goose, who remade the entire northwestern portion of Zebrai in his own vision, would first join in this period. As you can see around this sandbank, these buildings are all created by Flat Goose. At the beginning of this era, on the 22nd, construction of the Great Palace of Chudberg would begin its initial stage. This palace, though incomplete for the rest of the server's lifespan, would remain as a grand reminder of the potential of Isle. Though it was time of glory and progress, the server was not without its troubles. Frequently it crashed, which would cause time to rewind a few minutes. Many an unforeseen consequence occurred from this. It was a persistent issue throughout the lifespan of Isle, though it was particularly prevalent during this time. Furthermore, a proper whitelist was not set up until later in this period, and on the 24th, the duty of preventing unwanted guests fell to Mysteron and Rice's Good, as they repeatedly killed D-Man Who when he made his appearance on the server at the same time as Big Flame HDD. Unlike Big Flame, D-Man Who was an enemy from previous servers. Unlike Mysterion, he was judged as likely to not follow server rules, though we had never actually put any rules on paper. An understanding was that server peace was paramount in all members, and as such he was barred entry. This period would see the formation of perhaps the most important of the groups in the server. On the 25th, FTS would be formed between Rice is Good and Forerunner 09. The FTS would be an evolution of the previous information sharing agreement held by the two, eventually going on to oppose the group led by Mr. On. For now though, this alliance remained a secret. Their exploits will be covered later. At some point during this era, Rice is Good and Mr. On had come together and illegally entered the End. They would obtain elytra and shulker boxes early. The treasures found in this early journey would be used by Rice is Good for the early cartographic exploration, but was limited due to a lack of gunpowder. Despite having no need of it, hitherto was gunpowder taken from the mob farm stores, perpetually empty as Mr. On took it for TNT. Nearer buildings would be erected during this time. The CHD tower erected by the ephemeral player Karambit and Rice is Good was built in this time. Its style a stark departure from the stone shacks that fell below its shadow. No, it rose high and was made of stone, brick and glass. Despite this, it would never be completed and remained but a shell. Another site worth note is the Burb town constructed by Pesky Burb. It shared in the simple wood and stone construction of the early buildings but featured varied shapes and blocks that would be used for detail that would be little considered by most of the server. As such, this hamlet would be one of the best collections of buildings on the server, though it would be later destroyed in a remodeling on the 30th and never rebuilt in its entirety. In a departure from the great success of this time, great loss too was felt. On the 28th, Zebras, YT and Mr. On died in the end and the entirety of their inventories was lost. Later that same day, Rice is Good perished raiding an ancient city. The majority of his possessions lost within, though a few had survived, most notably his sword. These setbacks would little affect them though, as server development had been at the point where recovery was relatively easy. This can be readily seen in the building of Mount Doom. The mountain across the narrow strait would be the site where the inside joke between Rice is Good, Forerunner 09 and Mr. On would conclude, as a tiny lava pond would serve as the site of sacrifice for the exchanged items. On the 29th, the pond would be expanded into a glorious lava pit fitting of its name. As can be seen on the map, the pit's trailings land far into the ground below. Later that day, a meeting of the members of the server was held in the grand dining hall of the Chudberg Palace. The end of the Golden Age can be heralded by the great theft of Henry the Engineer. On the 2nd of July, Henry Engineer looted all the chests of Mr. On, looting stacks of gunpowder and TNT. This tumult would be an omen of things to come. Chapter 4, The Time of Decay. After the great theft, Mr. On took drastic actions. He fled Spawn and put his base and mob farm to TNT. He would flee to the far reaches of the world, eventually to be found at 168,000 to 2,000. He would begin the workings of a base there and invited his allies, depriving the community at Spawn of 3 individuals that greatly contributed to activity there. Regardless though, the majority of the Spawn community remained, and together on the 5th, they would construct an ice boat race circuit at a long frozen river while searching for treasure of some sort, mayhaps a woodland mansion. These advances though are fewer in this era, as it has been named such for the degeneration of the previous standards held by the server. On the 9th, the first admin abuse of Zebras YT occurred. He signed a contract with Peanut MF which involved steep terms. Peanut MF would sacrifice his valuable shulker full of riches. On Zebras YT's side, he had to give 2 blocks in creative mode. That being said, the crafty Peanut MF chose for his 2 blocks chests with NBT data in which contained other shulkers that contained valuables, effectively doubling his wealth. This action would set a terrible precedent in the times ahead. Indeed, for the contract that had been signed, it was to be unreversible. It would not be the last admin abuse. On the 15th, Mr. On revealed Rice is Good to the extent of his hubris and the foolishness of Zebras YT. For the steep cost of 64 Dragon's Breath, 28 Shulker Shells, 4 Elytra, a stack of Krang Obsidian, 77 gold blocks, 69 diamond blocks, and 21 diamonds, a full set of netherite armor, 6 upgrade templates, 6 notch apples, 51 regular golden apples, a trident, and a beacon, amongst other things. Zebras YT would give him 50 potions with effects: Fire Resistance, Regeneration 7, Strength 8, Resistance 5, Dolphin's Grace 3, Water Breathing, Haste 256, and Speed 3. These potions would have a duration long enough that would never be needed to be drank twice. I in fact managed to steal one here. I must say it is quite ridiculous for a peaceful server to require, of all things, Strength 7. These potions completely upset the fragile balance between the groups on Isle, for they made the drinker a god, unkillable and inescapable in combat, and capable of instantly mining obsidian. Zebra's white tea, in a third foolish admin abuse, further allowed Mr. to exchange half his potions for 12 end portal frames, naturally unobtainable in survival mode. Even so, he would have had 25 of these potions that would only be drank after falling into the void. It is worth noting that the contract signed by Mr. and Zebra's YT had secret conditions of secrecy under pain of ban. Despite this, Mr. flaunted his godlike powers over the server in Zebra's YT's absence. So incensed by this were the members of the FTS, they sought out drastic action against Mr. They had no need of this though, for the contract signed allowed Zebra's YT to ban him. Even so, these transgressions against server order had to be punished in the eyes of the FTS, and calling upon his privilege as an early member, Rice's Good called upon Zebra's YT to ban Mr. This privilege for the use of a single command was not explicitly stated by Zebra's YT, and was not known to Rice's Good for the majority of the server's life. However, it was brought to his attention by Foreigner09 that a few server members had possessed and used this privilege for mundane actions. Foreigner09, for example, summoned an ordinary Acacia button that now sits central within his great vault. Rice's Good, however, felt that due to not having used this privilege, it had become more potent over time and could be used for something of greater substance than that. Rice's Good would use this privilege to ban Mr. charging him with the crimes of disrupting server balance and splitting off from spawn. The latter charge would be levied as it betrayed a founding principle of the server, that players would stay in close vicinity, 160,000 blocks being a severe violation of this principle for entirely unfounded reasons. In addition to being banned, it was ordered that the coordinates to the base of Mr. be leaked to the FTS. Not long after, they made banners for their group and began the long journey to find that further sub-bases. Being so far out, it took a long time even with the Elytra that had long since become the premier form of transport on the server. When they had arrived, very little was found. A collection of small structures, a hobbit hole, and a huge ring that surrounded many villagers. At this, the FTS members were angered and stole the sugarcane farm and the lapis found in a hobbit hole, about 5 stacks of lapis blocks. The 2 actions of banning Mr. and stealing from his base had dire consequences later. For now though, they would return to Skyhome too, an industrial center FTS constructed some time after the spawn exit of Mr. and the subsequent loss of the mutually assured destruction principle that had ensured server peace at spawn until that point. As you can see here, we managed to find his base and I took a map of it. A vast stone wall, and I assume these long brown lines are lines upon chests. Not only was their base distant and far, it was also unknown in all but the broadest terms in which direction it was. This was because the denizens of the base were to equip mob heads at all times active on the server. Back at Skyhome, FTS would celebrate their victory and build their own sugarcane farm with the stolen materials. However, their rash actions would have dire consequences for the server. In the days following, FTS would begin construction on new bases, however they would both be left incomplete, one more than the other. At the site of Mount Olympus, one of the tallest mountains that had been discovered in the Minecraft world, Foreigner09 raised a castle in wood and stone brick, for the previous dome he had built was concealed in no ways at all. For its round table hold, the grand map would be completed, showing much of the continent that the place had lived and died on. An incomplete castle was built on a neighbouring mountain covered in snow, though shorter than Olympus. These are the vast mountains that we built those castles upon. It is easy to see how steep they were, and if Mr. had been looking for a suitable base location, he went much too far. The steep valleys that formed by mountains are clearly visible upon the map. And this is the great map that formed the round table hold of that base at Mount Olympus. Interlude: The Great Seething. While FTS celebrated their victory with construction, Mr. and his allies complained about the conduct of the FTS and Zebra's YT. Lair, seemingly the greatest ally of Mr. would go on constantly about the innocence of Mr. and the injustice of his ban. Mr. on his part argued for his innocence, and Zebra's YT had agreed to the contract. Similarly, they argued for the reason of the potions, claiming it was necessary for clearing out 4 ancient cities the resistance needed to deal with the Wardens. Further, they claimed the server was turning into 2B2T. Indeed, such a comparison was deeply flawed, as on the whole, it was Mr. Ron and Peanut MF who contributed the most to the server's degeneration in this aspect. Once they had realized FTS had a visit and stole some things from them, they were immediately incensed and called the hypocrisy on the part of the FTS. It is, however, worth noting that Mr. Ron and his allies too engaged in many incidences of theft over the course of the server. In an attempt to garner sympathy of the server members, the remaining few that still played, they overblew and exaggerated FTS actions, calling the theft of the sugar farm a grief, though a proper grief would have much more grievous consequences. This charge can be easily refuted by the fact that the villager ring was not touched at all. Further, Mr. Ron, since the construction of the third mob farm, had a stockpile of TNT much oversized for a server like Isle. His diplomatic offensive, not limited to complaining in the Discord, included attempts to sway people in private messages, though he targeted individuals allied to FTS. For those reasons, his accusations fell on ears deaf and absent. Another reason why FTS suffered no consequence was the fact that their enemies could not focus on the major transgressions of the FTS. No, instead, bird trees and a pile of lapis too high to ever be used in its entirety was the main point. As such, they would never win the court of public opinion. It was stacked, at that point anyways, against them. Perhaps the biggest culp of all was demands by Mr. Ron for Zebras YT, the admin, to ban himself, and Rise is good. Indeed, he may not have expected it to work, even though even that served to make him look even more stupid. On that note, shall the era of decay be concluded. In the beginning, it still showed signs of prosperity, but the final degeneration would engulf the server and leave it desolate. Chapter 5, An Undead Era. After the banning of Mr. Ron, player activity would take a sharp hit. Evidently, his forced departure had not sit well with his allies, even Peanut MF opting to quit. Even before Peanut MF's leaving, the Spawn Society had essentially collapsed. The construction of Mount Doom would be far away from Spawn, and Zebras YT, in response to the Spawn exodus, would be to build a base in the distance between Spawn End Islands and the Outer Islands. Max Verstrapon, a strong FTS ally, would opt to join the base at 160k. With this mass depopulation, FTS and Zebras YT would all come to the same conclusion. Isle was for them alone at that point, and so it would be until this point. Player activity has slowed to a crawl, and the server limps on, more dead than alive. That era is silent and empty, as is the world. Epilogue. Isle was glorious. It united seemingly perpetual enemies to come together and build a world that has exceeded all that came before it. But in its darker moments, we find huge cracks that seemingly always threaten to pull down all the progress that was made. It almost did, and the consequences of preventing it from doing so would destroy the server in a much more slow and undignified way, withering away as all left it. Even so, the grand server of Isle, for good or bad, will be